The family of 18-year-old college freshman Megan Trussell, who was found dead in the snow, are demanding the investigation be reopened and claim there may be foul play as they hire a private investigator, reportedly receive promising tips, and say the circumstances of that scene don't add up. Could there be more at play than what authorities have concluded so far? We're going to be sitting down with Megan's parents and also a professional coroner to maybe get more answers. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Now, with my job, I gotta say this, I am constantly producing so many stories a day. I'm reporting live. I'm exhausted by the end of the day, and I honestly just can't wait to get into bed. And that is why I want to talk real quick about our sponsor, Cozy Earth. So Cozy Earth has these bamboo sheets, okay? They're temperature regulating, which means you won't be waking up sweating or freezing. You're just comfortable all night long. And let me tell you, the bubble cuddle blanket, it's a total game changer. It is ridiculously soft. It has this textured bubble design that looks amazing when it's draped over the couch or the bed. And it's the kind of blanket that really everybody in the house is going to be fighting over. And here's the thing, once you feel that difference, you're going to understand why Cozy Earth stands out. They even give you, by the way, a 100-night sleep trial. So if you don't love them, you can just send it back. Plus, there's a 10-year warranty because honestly, comfort like this, shouldn't it last the long haul? So head over to CozyEarth.com, use my code Law&Crime for 40% off. And if you see that post-purchase survey, let them know that you heard about Cozy Earth right here, because your bed, it shouldn't just be where you sleep, it should be your happy place. And Cozy Earth makes that happen. We know that 18-year-old Megan Trussell died back in February, just about 6 months into her freshman year at the University of Colorado in Boulder. We know that. But as we talk about her today and the update that we need to share today, there is definitely not a clear consensus on what happened to her. Not all parties agree on this. Sure, authorities say one thing, but Megan's family believes there is something else going on entirely. And in fact, I am going to be speaking to her parents, Joe Trussell and Vanessa Diaz, in a moment. And I'm going to be getting some perspective also from a professional coroner to get a better understanding of what might have happened here. But let's go back for a second. Let's go back to February 9th, 2025. Megan leaves the campus after reportedly getting into a fight with her then roommate, Haley Strickland, who, by the way, recently spoke to People magazine, and we're going to talk about what she had to say. But surveillance footage even captures Megan leaving campus wearing these dark yoga pants, a blue jacket, and white sneakers. Let's remember that, the white sneakers. Now, Megan wasn't responding to texts from her parents. She was officially reported missing February 12th, and on February 15th, park rangers found Megan's frozen body covered in snow in a remote area near Boulder Canyon Drive by a drainage culvert and creek outside the city. And what authorities initially described as, quote, hard to reach terrain that required a technical evacuation, including the need to rappel. And all they could see was her hair and her face protruding from the snow. You fast forward to May. The Boulder County Sheriff's Office and the Boulder County Coroner's Office released a joint statement concluding that after an autopsy, Megan died, quote, as the result of the toxic effects of amphetamine. That is, by the way, an Adderall, which Megan's family confirmed she had taken. Authorities also apparently found 3 empty bottles for these pills in her dorm, in addition to a bottle that was apparently found near her body. Each bottle can potentially hold 30 pills. The Boulder County Coroner, Jeff Martin, said, our opinion was based on several factors, including but not limited to toxicology results and the presence of undigested prescription medication found during the examination. Hypothermia, by the way, was a contributing factor here as well. Now, the manner of death was ruled to be essentially, and I have to be careful how I say this because of YouTube guidelines, but essentially that Megan died in a way that she did this to herself. I have to be careful the way we word it, but I think you can get the idea, okay? Self-inflicted. Now, her family doesn't necessarily believe this, okay? They reportedly believe that Megan was attacked, that she was assaulted. Her mom seemingly believing that the scene was staged. They have highlighted problems in the investigation. For example, they cite how Megan's purse and phone weren't with her body, that there were apparently signs of physical injuries. Although I will tell you, the coroner's office has come out and said that those injuries were consistent with a fall, and that fall didn't cause her death. Now, authorities also previously said, quote, we have found no evidence to suggest that Megan was physically harmed or killed by another person. And by the way, going back to that phone and purse, which is really interesting, according to the Boulder County Sheriff's Office, quote, on March 2nd, Megan's phone was traced to a resale kiosk at a Boulder grocery store. It had been sold by 50-year-old Elliot Michael Befor, an unhoused individual who reported receiving it from another unhoused man. And B4 was arrested on May 14th, and he was charged with theft, a third-degree misdemeanor, and false declaration to a pawnbroker, that's another misdemeanor, a second degree. He has since been released on bond. On March 5th, Megan's purse was found by a community member near the 39.6-mile marker of Highway 36 along the bike path. The community member had looked inside the purse and found an empty prescription bottle with Megan's name on it, leading her to call the Boulder County Communications Center. The purse was ultimately traced back to the same area in Boulder Canyon where Megan's body was recovered. Neither of the individuals who were in possession of her purse or phone are believed to have had any direct contact with Megan. In other words, they're saying they didn't have anything to do with her death. But also, I'll tell you, according to the Daily Mail, one of Megan's shoes, remember I mentioned the sneakers? One of her sneakers that she was wearing when she left the campus, it was never found. Now, the family has issues with the location of where Megan was found as well. In fact, in a Facebook group that is entitled Megan Trussell, CU Boulder Student, Death Case Discussion, Info and Tips, Vanessa Diaz, her mother, writes, quote, "The culvert is hidden and off trail, a place that requires prior knowledge to find. Megan could not reasonably have walked roughly 3 miles from her dorm in about an hour to a place she'd never been, in complete darkness, on frozen ground, wearing only one shoe and without a phone or flashlight. I'm posting the video we recorded so people can see the terrain and conditions for themselves. These are facts. Use your common sense and decide what makes sense to you." And here's a portion of that video. Now, to be clear, no one has been arrested, no one has been charged in connection with Megan's death because authorities are saying no one's responsible. And then you go back to Megan's former roommate, okay, Miss Strickland, who I mentioned before. So she provided this interview with People magazine. And in the interview, she says how Megan was a, quote, once-in-a-lifetime kind of person, how she loved her family, how the two were close. But yes, they had the typical roommate arguments, but it was never very serious. It would always resolve itself. Now, she also said that she was concerned that Megan was developing mental health issues, even encouraging her to go to a different therapist or get medication. And in terms of the night in question, when Megan walked off, she claimed she came home, saw Megan and her boyfriend being intimate. They get into a fight. Quote, "We had a whole conversation, and she said that she respected it and that she understood. I walked in on them, and I just felt betrayed." And Strickland claims that she left for work and never saw Megan again. By the way, the boyfriend hasn't been officially identified. He's not been implicated in Megan's death in any way. But according to People magazine, who apparently reviewed the case files in this story, Megan and her boyfriend apparently got into a disagreement and he broke up with her. Now, Strickland claims that she didn't immediately notify authorities that Megan was missing in the first 2 days because she thought Megan was just at her sister's place. According to the Mirror US, Megan's family, who hired a private investigator, they have been asking the community for help here. And this is a big update. They have reportedly received, quote, 4 promising tips regarding Megan's death. They are pushing for the case to be reopened. I'm going to get to that in a minute. However, the Boulder County Sheriff's Office went on the defensive, telling the Daily Mail that Megan's cause of death was determined, quote, on the available evidence and facts related to this investigation. A spokesperson saying Sheriff Curtis Johnson believes that his detectives and deputies conducted a thorough investigation into Megan's death based on all available evidence. This was a tragic situation, and the family has been very involved from the beginning. Sheriff's Office employees, along with investigators from the Coroner's Office and District Attorney's Office, met with Trussell family attorneys several times at the request of Megan's parents. As with any case, the Sheriff's Office will evaluate new evidence that comes to light and determine if additional investigation is warranted. By the way, there is a GoFundMe that has been set up on behalf of Megan's mom, Vanessa, to raise funds to further this essentially private investigation. They're raising funds, namely for a private autopsy, legal funds, private investigator, experts, lab testing. It's raised over $85,000 so far at the time of this recording. And a change.org petition has been set up as well. It says in part, the initial investigation was marred by errors and oversights, failing to thoroughly explore all potential leads and evidence that could bring clarity and justice. This wasn't just a minor slip-up. It was a mishandling that calls for a renewed, diligent, and transparent investigation. The community, her family, and friends all agree that a reinvestigation is vital to ensure every avenue is explored with the seriousness it deserves. It goes on to say, quote, "We are now calling on Governor Jared Polis to take action. As governor, he oversees the Department of Public Safety, which directs the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, CBI. We are urging him to have the CBI step in and review the mishandled investigation conducted by the Boulder County Sheriff's Office into Megan's death." All right, so right now I want to bring in two special guests. I am joined by Megan's parents, Joe Trussell and Vanessa Diaz. Thank you both so much for coming on. Let me just start off by saying I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm so sorry that you are continuing to investigate this and that you have to continue talking about this. I know this is not easy, and I really appreciate you both taking the time, but it's important. It's very important. So thank you both so much. I wanted to start off by asking both of you how you're doing at this point. Vanessa, I'll start with you. How are you doing? How are you holding up?
I'm doing okay. Good days and bad, of course. I took a pretty long leave of absence from my job, and now I'm back for the new school year. And it's good to be back. But Joe and I are both now working two full-time jobs, running the investigation and also doing our jobs to pay the bills. And
yep. And Joe, how about yourself?
Doing okay. I think that the grief from what happened is something that'll be with us forever. So I don't have any illusions that any of this is going to take that away. So I'm dealing with that on my own time. But this case is a problem to be solved, and it requires a lot of focus. This is DIY. Me and Vanessa are learning as we go, drinking from a fire hose, trying to figure out how an investigation works and what we can do to get this thing solved.
And I've laid out a lot of this already, and I'm hoping that you both can fill in some of the pieces as we have these new developments and where the investigation may go. Before I get into any of that, if you can just, I'll go to each of you. What was Megan like, and what was your relationship like with her? Vanessa, I'll start with you.
Megan was an incredibly creative and thoughtful, kind, considerate human being. She was my favorite travel buddy. She was bilingual in English and Spanish like me. And we did a lot of things together. We were very close. And I miss her so much every single day. Her smile, her laughter. She always had a joke. She's always making people laugh. And she had a gift for making people feel like they were the most important person to her. Like she was their favorite. And there's a lot of people who are really hurting since she's gone.
I've gotten that sense when I've been researching this whole story and researching more about your daughter. I've got that sense of how special she was and how she affected so many people's lives and how invested people are in trying to figure out what happened here. Joe, how about yourself?
Megan, she was cool. She was just a great person to be around, and she had a real kind of intuitive flair for humor. She could read a room. She knew exactly what joke would hit and what wouldn't. She was a pop culture genius. She, her taste in movies and music and literature and art was far beyond her years. She was extremely advanced in that respect, and it made her really fun to be around. And that's really what I miss, is being able to bounce movies off of her, bounce music off of her, and get her opinions, her very strong opinions about that kind of stuff. It's a big hole to fill, and we never will.
I'm sure. I want to get a little bit more into the case, and I want to get a little bit more into the investigation. I laid some of this out, but I want a little bit more clarity here. Vanessa, what is your theory of what happened to Megan? I understand that you believe that she was attacked. What were the circumstances that you believe at this point that she left the campus, how she ended up, where she ended up, at what point was she attacked? I mean, if you, and what we should be thinking about this.
Yeah, so she had a disagreement with her roommate. Her roommate was actually, Megan was having some alone time with her boyfriend in her dorm. Her roommate was supposed to be at work until 11:30. The roommate surprised them and came back into the dorm at, I think, around 9, and isn't really supposed to leave work for her 15-minute break, but did. And so she surprised Megan and her boyfriend, got upset that he was there and, that they were engaged in an intimate moment. And there was no physical altercation, but it was, words were exchanged. The boyfriend basically didn't want to be involved in drama. And so he said he wanted to take a break and he left. And, she was pretty sad about that. I don't doubt that at all. So I think even since the last time we did an interview, I've actually been able to review the video recordings of her on the CCTV on campus. One detective had reported that she looked distraught, that she was walking around like just haphazardly, and that's not true. I saw the video and she's walking normally. She's not wiping tears. She's not looking at her phone. And then she left campus. The last image of her was going down something called the Buff Walk in Boulder. And that's the last image of her. The reports state that she walked along either Arapahoe or Walnut because her phone was pinging there. Police, actually Boulder CUPD, knocked on all the doors, asked for video footage from any of the businesses in that area. Nobody saw her on cameras. There were street cameras, like traffic cameras. She was never detected on any cameras. So what I think happened is that she was attacked either on the Buff Walk or right after the Buff Walk. Her purse was ripped, which that seam that was ripped out, I know that was a very strong seam because I sewed that purse for her myself as a hobby. I have a special sewing machine that can sew through 15 layers of denim. So I super reinforced that seam right there. And that was ripped out completely. And it was super heavy duty thread as well. It was like a very thick polyester. So for that to be ripped off would take an enormous amount of pull. And so there's that. She has injuries. Most of her injuries are on the left side of her body. Her right shoe is missing. So when you think about how she might have been pulled away, she's also, the left sleeve of her jacket is ripped. So, somebody's pulling to the left, yanked out of her shoe. She falls, gets those injuries. And, this is the part I absolutely have no idea on what happened to her after, but people don't commit suicide and break their teeth and rip their purse and rip their jacket sleeve. That's just not something that happens. The injuries that they're describing are not consistent with a suicide. The amount of Adderall that she has in her body and in her bloodstream, in her stomach and esophagus and in her bloodstream doesn't make any sense. It wasn't a lethal level. It was actually on the lower end of toxic for somebody who has been taking Adderall for the last 4 years. It's also extremely rare for somebody to commit suicide on only amphetamine, Adderall. In fact, you can't even find statistics on it. I think the only one I found now is Megan for Boulder County. So we don't know how she got up to the canyon. We know that her phone pinged at the park around 10:36. And then there's a discrepancy between when her phone pinged farther up the canyon. The same detective who said she looked distraught, he has conflicting times of when her phone last pinged. So I'm actually requesting that data specifically from the FBI. When people talk about that the FBI was helping CUPD, all they did was help them with the phone location data. There were no people here, boots on the ground. It was all email between CUPD and the FBI. So CUPD isn't very forthcoming with that information right now. Not sure why, but they're telling me I have to request it directly from the FBI. So we have a victims advocate who's actually helping with that right now. Because, it's hard to put a timeline together when there's inaccuracies in the police reporting and they won't share the actual data. There's a lot of other issues, but I don't know how long we have. But
no, I understand, and obviously there's conflicting because the authorities say that her injuries were consistent with a fall, right, and that it wasn't consistent with being attacked. Joe, before I get to you, just Vanessa, when you've expressed your concerns, when you've expressed that this doesn't make sense to authorities, what is the response generally you've been getting, other than maybe being stonewalled, like you said, they're not providing the information you need? Have they just said, again, we're sticking with our theory of the case, you're wrong? Have they ever are they taking what you're finding and what you're saying seriously?
No, they're not listening at all. The last time we actually talked to the forensic pathologist was on June 4th. We had asked specifically about the injuries, and you want to know what she said? She said, "I'm not going to speculate, but it didn't contribute to her death." Mm-hmm. So she wasn't going to speculate. She said it was a fall, but it's not like a single plane fall, which is what a different forensic pathologist told me when I went to Crime Weekly. It's all over her body. They're all over her body. So it's impossible for them to tell me it was from a fall. But then when pushed, she said she wasn't going to speculate. And my thinking is, isn't that your job? Isn't your job to tell me what happened? Isn't that your job to explain how those injuries happened? instead of just guessing about what they saw in her stomach and esophagus, which, by the way, there was so much that it caused hemorrhaging in the lumen of the esophagus, which, these are all terms I never knew before any of this. Right. And when you actually quantify, it's simple math. I had a friend who's a pharmacist look it over for me, and whatever's in her stomach is 3 to 5%. That pathologist during that same meeting specifically said that she ruled it a suicide based on the sheer volume of pill material in her stomach and esophagus, that it was an act of volition, like she meant to kill herself. Well, here's the thing. When you calculate it, when you do the math, it's 3 to 5% of whatever that whole volume is, of whatever it is. So there's no other substances in her system. There's nothing else that showed up on toxicology. And they assured me that they checked for novel drugs that are new or anything that would be out of scope of the normal, drugs that people abuse, which, I have questions about that too. They also have no curiosity. Like if they told me if I wanted to know what was in that mass, that I could have it sent out for testing myself. But my point is, actually, I don't care what's in it. You told me that it was all based on the sheer volume of pill material, but it's like a 100-piece puzzle and 5 of the pieces are Adderall. What's the rest? And so you based a suicide ruling on a guess, on something you looked at and eyeballed and like, oh, yep, it's suicide. It's not science.
Now, Joe, it's being reported that the family has received 4 promising tips regarding what happened to Megan. I don't know if you're at liberty to share what those are, but whatever you can tell us about what these potential tips are, what can you tell us?
Well, it's important to note that we've gotten hundreds of tips, and
Sure.
and all of them have to be vetted, and some of them are kind of on the wild side. But we've been doing an outreach to the unhoused community in Boulder, not because necessarily we believe that anybody from the homeless community was involved, but because of where Megan's body was found. It's a known kind of homeless encampment. So we started last summer going up and handing out care packages. We've got this great support system. People donated all this stuff so we could go up, meet the unhoused community in Boulder, and see if they know anything. And that's where several of the tips have come from, which we're working on now. We're not at liberty to talk about them at this
Sure.
point, but we do feel like in the past month, we've reached some kind of a turning point. It's really hard to tell over the months as things develop. I mean, it's a curveball every day. Seems like something else happens, but we feel like we've moved into a new direction here, and some of these tips might prove to be very valuable. So we're just looking for resolution. 2 things. Megan didn't kill herself. Somebody's responsible. Those are the only things I care about in this whole thing. We've got all these layers of stuff that we're dealing with otherwise, but the opportunity to help out the unhoused community in Boulder, give something, get something, might help us out here.
And just to be clear, you don't have to give me names. Do you have your own potential list of suspects, identifiable people that you have shared with law enforcement that you know at this point but will not share?
Well, it's important to note that law enforcement considers this a suicide and that the case is closed.
Right.
So when I say DIY, this is us, our private investigator, our attorney, our support group, support system. We're the ones who are doing this. It is not law enforcement.
Sure.
So we're having to do this independently. I don't know how to do this, but we have a really good PI who does know how to do it.
I was going to ask you about the private investigator that you hired. What can you tell us about the work the private investigator is doing?
He is extremely enthusiastic and motivated, and I think that's the most important thing. He's got a really strong set of goals. He is very much aligned with what we want to do. Vanessa's talked to him more than I have. She could probably provide some insight on that.
So I also want to preface this that we don't know what we're doing. We had a private investigator previously and turned out just wasn't doing the work that we needed, which me and some of my friends are very good at, like digging into the data and looking at analytics, right? We need somebody who's boots on the ground, who's willing to go out and talk to people, knock on doors, tail people if they need to. And, when I interviewed him on the phone and he said he was all in and he'll send over the contract, before I even signed the contract, he was up there at the location. And to me, that's like half the battle, is getting people to the location, because once people go there and see it, they realize there is no way that she got there on her own. Like, people who are from there can't find that spot. So the fact that this man jumped in his car and went up there and asked just based on a pin, and then he called me to be like, okay, I think I'm here, but I don't know if I'm here. He's driven by curiosity. He absolutely doesn't think it was a suicide. And, he's in contact with me through text. There's a couple of other tips or concerns that have come in that I don't really want to share quite yet, but he's all over it. We had a little bit of a hiccup. We didn't get going as fast as we would have liked, but I think we're off and running now. He's got those 4 leads that he's already working on.
I wanted to ask you both about, it's an update. It's about Megan's roommate, Haley Strickland. She provided an interview to People magazine. She made comments regarding Megan, her relationship with Megan, the last time that she saw her. She also made comments that Megan may have been struggling with mental health issues. I don't know if you had an opportunity to see, to read what she said in that interview, but Joe, I wanted your thoughts on her speaking out.
Well, first off, Haley is, she has every right to say whatever she wants. And I welcome whatever comments she has. However, I do have to say that article is completely inaccurate. Not a whole lot that I can verify, but as I read through it, I thought none of this makes any sense. Megan and Haley knew each other for 5 months. That's it. So some of the insights that Haley provides in the article are inaccurate. They just don't make sense. Not to get into Haley too much, but she never reported Megan missing. She never helped us with the search. She didn't help hand out flyers, nothing like that. So, we've had very little contact with her. Her motivation for speaking to People magazine is entirely her own. I don't know what to do about Haley, honestly.
And I just want to add that Haley is the only person that actually knew Megan. There's a bunch of armchair detectives who chime in on our articles. We've learned to not read any of people's comments, but she is the only person who actually knew Megan who's saying suicide. And they knew each other for a full 5 months, and that relationship was very rocky from the perspective of her entire family and her friends, and her boyfriend will even tell you that.
That's an important point, Vanessa, and I want to clarify the record. When she talks about or alludes to this idea that Megan had mental health struggles and needed to see a new therapist or needed a medication, from your perspective, friend's perspective, is this totally outside anything that you've ever observed with Megan? I'll start with you, Vanessa.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And, Megan didn't need a new therapist. Megan loved her therapist. They had a great relationship. She was on maternity leave. Actually, that Saturday, February 8th, she had sent Megan an email saying, all right, I'm back. We can start therapy again. And I promise Megan would have been happy about that. Like, she loved her. They had a good relationship, and Megan got a lot of comfort and, was working through. At first it was, girl stuff at school. And then, when Joe and I split, she worked through that with her therapist. And there's no shame in having a therapist, by the way. Everybody should have a therapist, if you ask me. Mental health is something that needs to be cared for and taken care of.
Megan's therapist, she started therapy when she was a minor. So her therapist was a mandatory reporter, meaning if Megan had ever had any ideas about self-harm, suicidal ideations, anything like that, the therapist would have had to report it. And she didn't, because, Megan went through, what's rough for any teenager, her parents splitting up, and she never took the easy road. She faced everything really upfront and was very healthy about it. So, that kind of goes back to the idea that Megan, she just wasn't suicidal, wasn't her way, and she had a really good relationship with her therapist. So for a freshman psych major to provide an evaluation of Megan's health to People magazine is a little bit out of bounds.
And additionally, in the police reports, she told them in her interviews that Megan was not suicidal, that Megan had never said she was suicidal. She said something about Megan was upset about politics, which, Megan was known to rant about some political things happening, but suicide over that? I mean,
yeah.
It's just out of the question. And it's a reach, it's a reach for somebody who wants the spotlight for a minute is really that's my opinion. But
so, Joe, people who are watching this, if they want to help, whatever information you can get, and I mentioned this before, the GoFundMe has been set up. There's a change.org petition that was set up. A lot of people contributing money, gives you a sense of how expensive legal funds are, and expert analysis and lab testing. How is the fund doing, Joe? And how is the change.org petition going?
The GoFundMe is going well. I mean, from what we've learned, the Boulder County Sheriff's Office took DNA samples, swabs, rape kit, all that stuff, evidence from the crime scene, and never tested any of it. So then we run into, they said we can take possession of that stuff and test it, but then that messes up the chain of custody if somebody's ever in, if somebody's ever accused. So we've had trouble with that, but also, DNA testing, it's 25 grand to get in the door. If you look at the sheer volume of evidence that we would have to have tested, we're talking about $100,000 or more. You know, I don't have that in my back pocket, so the GoFundMe every bit helps. The donations for the unhoused community in Boulder, that's really helping out a lot too. The petition, started off really strong and continues kind of to have a life of its own. One interesting thing is, after a lot of friends and family signed it, word got around the CU Boulder campus, and a lot of students have come forward, a lot of upset students who feel like not enough was done, and they've been signing the petition. And that, to me, that's really important because the students need to know about what's happening.
And Vanessa, the goal is to have this investigation reopened, right? I mean, is the goal at this point, if you get new information, if you have new information, you can present it to law enforcement. If you can present it to CBI, they may take a look at it. Can you tell us what the status of that is?
Yeah. So, following other cases, right? Like the Ellen Greenberg case, and knowing that nobody's going to do anything until the suicide ruling's changed. In fact, the Boulder DA has already told us that he wasn't going to investigate the investigation because of the suicide ruling. The 4 empty bottles of Adderall, and like he said, that was significant. When it's like, it's frustrating because people don't seem to do any research on that medication. She had ADHD. She was kind of a slob. She didn't throw her bottles away. There's a lot of people I know like that. So, him basing the assumption that, nope, they did a thorough investigation. The coroner said it was a suicide. So until that's changed, we're kind of pausing on asking the CBI to investigate, because once that's changed, then we can make that request. We can make that request to the governor. He is the one who can, or from my understanding, he's the one who can ask the CBI to do that. However, I don't feel like anybody's going to do that until suicide ruling's changed. Although, you know what? Hunter S. Thompson, they just made the announcement in Colorado that they're going to take another look at his suicide ruling because the wife asked. So it's kind of like, well, I guess Joe better start producing more books so that he can be Hunter S. Thompson level, to have that kind of clout, to have somebody reinvestigate a suicide ruling that nobody was questioning. But this is Megan's suicide ruling is very questionable. There's no suicide note. There's no history of it. She has injuries that you beat yourself up when you take a bunch of pills, and then the pills, you die before they're even absorbed into your body. None of it makes sense. And it's baffling to me that people aren't questioning it more strongly, that very intelligent people who happen to be elected officials, though, are just so, nope, it's suicide, when they haven't looked at any of the details or considered any of the discrepancies, nor do they listen to them.
Well, I'll tell you this much. Joe, Vanessa, you might not be Hunter S. Thompson, you might not be the wife, but what I will tell you is, in my experience, when a story gets a lot of traction and a lot of people are focusing on it, that is when you do see some sort of update, some sort of change. So I will just tell you, we are thinking about you, both of you. Our hearts and our prayers are going out to you and the family. We're going to keep an eye on this. We have put up the change.org petition. We put up the GoFundMe as well. And anybody who sees this, if they want to contribute to your investigation, to get more answers, they're encouraged to do so. But Joe Trussell, Vanessa Diaz, thank you so much for coming on. And again, I'm so sorry for your loss, and I'm so sorry for what you're continuing to go through.
Thank you for your time today. We truly appreciate it. Every bit helps, and this is huge. Thank you.
All right, so now I want to bring on somebody that we always like to call on when we have these kind of mysterious, maybe these cases where there's two different sides, we're trying to understand it. I want to bring on Dr. Nada Rutherford, who's the Richland County coroner. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about this. From your perspective, and obviously you didn't do the autopsy here, you're looking at the reporting here, you're looking at the circumstances, but you have the experience. You've seen a ton of these kind of cases. Is there anything that you see that would suggest potential foul play here?
Yes, there is. So the fact that some of her items were missing certainly raises suspicion in my mind. The fact that she's missing a shoe, why is she missing a shoe? So I am 100% in agreement with the family that something about the death does seem suspicious, but you can't make things up and you can't speculate. And so then we have to go to the evidence that we have, what the autopsy shows us, and does the story, the way the body was found, regardless of the thoughts we may have in our mind, does it make sense? And I think that's where sometimes families who are grieving will sometimes get caught up in some of those details. But as a medical professional, as someone who does death investigations, some of those details get canceled out because it doesn't match up with what we found at the autopsy.
Let me go to this. What do you make of the cause of death being from amphetamines, right? That hypothermia was a contributing factor here. I guess it would be that she wandered off, that she was, feeling the toxic effects of this medication, and they talk about the injuries are not consistent with her being attacked, but from a fall. Do you have a sense of what the theory is behind her death?
Yes. So whenever we see a toxicology report, we start to look at the numbers. So it's not enough for us to just have a confirmatory test that this medication or this substance is in someone's body. What we're also looking for is the quantity of those things. And then again, not just the information that's found in that serum or the blood sample that we have. What did we see at autopsy? So were there pills or pill fragments in the throat area, in the stomach area? Was there anything that would have been consistent with this kind of intentional ingestion of these medications? And so when we look for foul play, especially in something where we have maybe toxic effects of a drug or medication, what we're looking to see is, are there signs of foul play around the mouth or the throat? Could someone have forced her to take this level of medication to get to a toxic level? So we would start with looking at the prescription. When was it prescribed? How many days ago did she pick up this prescription? How often did she pick up her prescription? Who was prescribing this to her? Did she have multiple sources where she could get this medication from? We run something called a scripts report, and they approve that report and send it to us. And so we look at the providers who provide that medication. Could she have had enough to create this toxic effect? And the level, the quantity of what was in her system, does it match up with like an accidental or a kind of intentional ingestion from someone? So when we start seeing super high levels, we start to think intentional ingestion.
How difficult would it be to stage a scene like this? If we're listening to what some of the family has been saying, that it's possible the scene was staged, the pills were forced maybe either down her throat and put afterwards to make it look like something other than it maybe was. Would be staging a scene be difficult? I guess the question is, would it be obvious?
Well, here's what I would say to that. What was the state of the pills and how they were found? Were these just whole pills that looked like they hadn't been metabolized by the body at all? Then maybe that would be indicative of something, right? Because I could take water or some sort of fluid and put the pills in it and pour it down your throat afterwards. But it doesn't stop the fact that you had to be alive enough to metabolize the medication in order for it to have a toxic effect. And I think that's what the family may be missing, is that there was some ingestion of whatever this substance was Could someone have forced it on her? Sure. Could they have crushed it and put it in a drink? Sure. But when would they have had time to do that? She goes missing. She's not seen on camera, and then she's found. Just her falling asleep outside someplace would have made her susceptible to being a victim. But again, hypothermia is something that can cause death. So, I mean, there are just so many different little things here that raise the red flag, but don't necessarily equal a kind of a smoking gun, if you know what I mean.
What about the injuries where you have the family believing that she may have been attacked, but the injuries from authorities seem to suggest that it was from a fall? In fact, Deputy Coroner Colleen Hancock says that Megan's body was found about 20 feet down this steep, rocky slope, that there was blunt force injuries, but they were all consistent with falling down, that didn't cause her death or contribute to her death. Thoughts on that?
So if the blunt force injuries would have been contributory to her death, the autopsy would have stated that. So she could have had a brain bleed, but if it was not severe enough, then to be ruled in as a cause of death statement on her death certificate, then it's not anything. And were the falls consistent with post-mortem damage, or were they consistent with pre-mortem damage? So again, those are details in the autopsy report that I haven't seen to state where we believe these injuries occurred along the timeline of her life. Because we have people who fall because they're under the influence of something, but the fall and all the scratches and the bruising and the blunt force injuries did not cause their death.
And doctor, before I let you go, the location of where she was found. The family has emphasized that this is, and it's true, it's a remote area. It's dark. It's strange to be there. It's outside the city limits. It's a weird place to find a body. It's a weird place to find Megan. Does that
Absolutely
stand out to you?
It does stand out to me because what it says to me is that there's the possibility of a secondary crime scene. So again, I'm with the family 100% when they say that something seems suspicious. Again, that missing shoe would bother me as a mother. It bothers me as an investigator. Where's that other shoe? If people are going to steal your shoes, they're going to steal both of your shoes, right? If they're trying to stage something, why would they just take one? Why wouldn't they take both? So could this be the secondary crime scene? Possibly. And that's where I think investigators have to dig a little bit deeper. I'm totally with the family in them saying, just look a little bit deeper to see if there's anything else that could possibly be wrong here.
No, that's a good point. And doctor, before we wrap things up, anything that our audience should be thinking about in terms of this?
If you truly believe that someone forced someone to take pills, you want to look for signs of injury about the mouth, the tongue, the gums. Look to see if there's any defense wounds on the hands, because it would be very difficult to get even a semi-conscious person to just swallow pills. They would choke. And so I would definitely want to know in that autopsy report, what signs of struggle could there have been that could have forced her, that could have been indicative of someone forcing her to take that number of pills.
Dr. Nita Rutherford, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can follow me on X or Instagram. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.